The candlelight flickered across Martha Caldwell's face. She pressed a warm cloth against the stranger's bleeding shoulder. His eyes, steel blue and sharp as shattered ice, never left hers. Outside, snow hammered the windows of her small cabin, a lonely outpost on the edge of Dodge City. But inside, the air crackled with something far more dangerous than the December storm. "You should turn me in," he whispered, his voice as rough as the prairie wind. "There's a $2,000 bounty on my head." Martha's breath hitched. She knew the face from the posters. Jesse Crow, the man who'd robbed the First National Bank in Abilene 2 weeks ago. 3 people died that day: a bank clerk, a teller, a bystander, all dead. Yet as her fingers trembled, it wasn't from fear. It was from a feeling she thought she had buried 8 years ago, right alongside her husband. The wet cloth slipped from her fingers, landing with a soft thud on the floorboards. From the distance, cutting through the howl of the wind, came the faint sound of horses. Sheriff Bat Masterson's posse, still searching, still hungry for justice, or maybe just for the bounty. Jesse's hand, surprisingly steady, found hers in the dim light. It was warm, strong, alive. And in that moment, Martha Caldwell, the most respectable widow in Dodge City, made a choice. A choice that would unravel her life, thread by painful thread, until nothing was left but a truth more terrible than any lie she had ever told. Martha Caldwell had buried her husband, Edmund, 8 years ago. With him, she had buried any hope of feeling desire again. At 58, she had accepted the quiet, lonely respectability expected of a widow in 1878. The townsfolk saw her as a monument to propriety: graying hair always pinned in a severe bun, modest dresses buttoned right up to her throat, her eyes dutifully cast down during Sunday service. They saw the ghost of Edmund Caldwell's wife. They had no idea who she'd been before him. They had no idea about the fire that still banked low in her soul, waiting for a single gust of wind to roar back to life. That December night, the wind provided. The knock on her door was hard, urgent. No decent person traveled in a blizzard like this, which is precisely why her heart gave a strange, unfamiliar leap. She opened it to find him standing there, tall as a cottonwood tree, dark hair plastered to his skull by snow and sweat. Blood, a shocking crimson against the white of the storm, seeped through his thick coat at the shoulder. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her stomach feel like it was full of startled birds. "Ma'am," he rasped, "I need help." She should have slammed the door in his face. She should have screamed for the neighbors, though they were a mile away and couldn't have heard her over the storm. She should have done the sensible thing, the respectable thing. Instead, she stepped aside. Jesse Crow stumbled into her kitchen, leaving a trail of melted snow and drops of his own blood on her clean floor. She'd heard the name whispered in hushed, frightened tones at the general store. The Abilene job had been brutal, a simple bank robbery that had exploded into a bloodbath. Bullets flying, innocents dying. And this man, this wounded animal bleeding on her floor, was the cause of it all. "Sit," she commanded, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. As she heated water and gathered bandages, Martha stole glances at him. Even wounded, he radiated a raw, dangerous energy that made her mouth go dry. His shoulders were so broad they strained the fabric of his shirt. When she helped him out of his heavy, soaked coat, her fingers brushed against the hard muscle of his chest, and a jolt of pure electricity shot up her arm. It was a feeling so foreign, so long forgotten, that she almost gasped. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and you're helping me anyway." Martha met his gaze, her own eyes reflecting the flickering candlelight. "I suppose I am." She had forgotten what it felt like to be looked at like a woman. Not a tragic figure, not a grieving saint, but a woman of flesh and blood. Jesse's eyes didn't see the widow. They traveled from her face to where her simple dress pulled tight across her still full breasts, and she felt a hot flush creep up her neck. As she began to clean the ragged bullet wound, her touch was professional, distant. She tried to ignore how his muscles tensed beneath her fingers, how the warmth of his skin seemed to seep into her own. She was focused on the task, on the blood and the torn flesh. And then she saw it. Tucked inside his shirt, hanging from a leather cord around his neck, was a small silver locket. It was tarnished and dented, but as she worked, her fingers brushed against it, and it swung free. The clasp had been damaged, and it fell open in her palm. Inside wasn't a picture of gold coins or a faded map. It was a photograph, a delicate, hand-tinted image of a young woman with soft eyes and a gentle smile, holding a small baby wrapped in a white blanket. Her hands stilled, her breath caught in her throat. This changed everything. This wasn't just a lone, hardened killer. This was a husband, a father. Before she could speak, before she could ask the question burning on her tongue, the sound of hoofbeats grew louder, closer. Torches, bobbing like angry fireflies in the swirling snow, were visible through the frosted window pane. Masterson's boys, Jesse breathed, his body going rigid with tension. They've been on my trail for 2 weeks. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. If they found him here, her life was over. Her reputation would be destroyed. She'd be branded a traitor, an outlaw's woman. She could even go to jail. But as she looked from the approaching torches to the picture of the woman and child in her hand, she made a choice that had nothing to do with reputation. The root cellar, she whispered, her voice urgent. Behind the pantry. Go. Now. Jesse gripped her wrist, his calloused thumb stroking the frantic pulse point there. Why? Why are you doing this, Martha Caldwell? She looked into those dangerous blue eyes, now clouded with a desperate confusion, and felt something wild and hungry stir deep inside her, a creature she had locked away and starved for 8 long years. I don't know, she lied. But she did. She knew exactly why. She was not just saving a killer. She was saving a father for his child. The posse thundered past her cabin, the sheriff's voice a faint shout on the wind. He's wounded. Can't have gone far. Search the creek bed. When the sound of the hoofbeats finally faded into the storm, Martha helped a pale, sweating Jesse back up the narrow stairs from the cellar. His shirt was off now, and in the lamplight she could see that his chest was a roadmap of a hard life. Old scars from bullets and knives crisscrossed his skin, but the body beneath was still powerful, still alive. You could have turned me in, he said, his voice low, collected the reward, bought yourself a fine life. I don't need the money, she said, her voice tight. She held up the open locket. Tell me about them. Jesse's face, which had been a mask of stone, suddenly crumbled. He sank onto a kitchen chair, burying his face in his hands. My wife, Sarah, and my boy, Luke. The story came out in a torrent of grief and regret. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer, he claimed. He was a farmer whose land had been stolen by a corrupt banker, the same banker who ran the First National in Abilene. He'd only gone there to get back what was his, what he needed to take his family to California and start over. But the banker had pulled a gun. People started screaming. Shots were fired. It was all a terrible, bloody accident. He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, Martha. I swear it. I just wanted to save my family. Martha's heart ached for him. This was the man behind the monster on the posters, a desperate man pushed to a desperate act. She believed him. She wanted to believe him. That night she gave him her late husband's bed. As she lay awake in the small guest room, listening to the floorboards creak above her, she wasn't imagining a killer. She was imagining a grieving husband, a father separated from his child, and her heart went out to him. By morning, 6 more inches of snow had fallen, burying the world in a pristine, silent blanket of white. The roads were impassable. Jesse couldn't leave even if he wanted to, and a secret, shameful part of Martha prayed that he didn't want to. When she brought him breakfast, he was standing shirtless by the window, staring out at the white expanse, watching for riders. His back was a tapestry of violence, a testament to the life he'd lived. But now she saw it differently. Each scar was a story of survival, a mark of his fight to protect his family. See something you like, Mrs. Caldwell? He asked, his voice a low rumble, not even turning around. Martha's face flamed, but she didn't look away. Maybe, she heard herself say. He turned then, and the raw heat in his eyes made her knees feel weak. This was dangerous territory, more dangerous than hiding an outlaw from a posse. This was about crossing a line within herself, a line she couldn't uncross. The storm's not letting up, he said, his voice thick with an emotion that had nothing to do with the weather. Martha set the breakfast tray down, her hands trembling so hard the coffee cup rattled in its saucer. No, she whispered, it's not. 3 weeks. That's how long the January storms trapped them together in that small, isolated cabin. 3 weeks of stolen glances across the dinner table. 3 weeks of their hands brushing as she passed him a cup of coffee. 3 weeks of Martha Caldwell slowly, terrifyingly coming back to life. The layers of the grieving widow, of the respectable churchgoer, began to peel away, revealing the woman underneath. A woman with needs she had buried so deep she'd forgotten they existed. Jesse made himself useful. He chopped wood with a powerful, economic rhythm that mesmerized her. She would stand at the kitchen window, pretending to wash dishes, just to watch the muscles in his back and shoulders flex under the strain of the axe. When he would catch her staring, a slow, sinful grin would spread across his face. "Enjoying the show, Mrs. Caldwell?" "The wood needs splitting," she would reply, turning away, a hot blush creeping up her neck, while a strange heat pooled low in her belly. But they both knew that wasn't what she was watching. The evenings were a special kind of torture. They would sit by the fire, the only light in the room, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. He would mend his leather gear, his strong, calloused fingers, surprisingly nimble. She would sew, her needle dipping in and out of the fabric, but her mind was miles away. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was thick and heavy with unspoken desire, with words they were both too afraid to say. "Tell me about before," he said one night, his voice a soft rasp in the quiet room. "Before you were respectable." Martha's needle stilled in mid-stitch. Nobody in Dodge City knew about her past. Edmund had made sure of that. "What makes you think there was a before?" "The way you move," he said, his eyes glittering in the firelight. "The way you look at me sometimes when you think I'm not watching. You weren't always a proper rancher's wife, Martha. I'd bet my life on it." The sound of her Christian name on his lips, spoken in that low, intimate tone, made her shiver. "I danced," she confessed, the word a ghost on her lips, "in a saloon in Abilene, of all places, before I met Edmund." "Danced?" His eyes darkened with interest. "What kind of dancing?" She met his gaze across the hearth, a spark of her old defiance flaring up. The kind that kept men drinking and spending money they didn't have. He set down the piece of leather he was working on and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I would have spent every last dollar I had just to watch you move." Martha's breath caught in her chest. When was the last time a man had spoken to her like that? Like she was a desirable, dangerous thing, not a pitiful, dried-up old widow? It had been a lifetime ago. "That was a long time ago," she whispered. "Not so long." Jesse stood up, his tall frame seeming to fill the small room. He moved toward her chair, his steps slow and deliberate. "Dance for me now, Martha." Her heart hammered. "Please," he whispered, his voice laced with a raw plea. "Let me see the woman you really are." On legs that felt like they might give out from under her, Martha rose. There was no music but the lonely howl of the wind outside the cabin walls, but that was enough. She began to move, slowly at first, tentatively. Her hands skimmed her own body, tracing the curves of her hips, her waist, remembering the rhythm that had once paid her bills and driven men to distraction. Her hips began to sway. With a flick of her wrist, she pulled the pins from her hair, letting the heavy, gray-streaked waves fall loose around her shoulders. Jesse watched her, his expression rapt, like a starving man watching a banquet being prepared just for him. She moved closer, circling him, her eyes locked with his. The respectable widow was gone. In her place was the saloon dancer, the woman who knew the power she held in the sway of her hips. When she was just inches from him, his hand shot out and caught her by the waist, pulling her flush against his hard body. "Beautiful," he breathed, his voice ragged. So damn beautiful. Their faces were so close, she could smell the scent of leather and gunpowder and something else, something uniquely masculine that made her senses reel. She should pull away. She should slap his face and remember her place, remember her dead husband and her standing in the community. Instead, she leaned in. His lips were rough, demanding, and they tasted of coffee and desperation. Martha melted into him, her hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt, pulling him closer. This wasn't the chaste, gentle kiss of a husband. This was the kiss of a man who takes what he wants. A kiss that claimed her. And she didn't fight. She kissed him back with all the pent-up loneliness and desire of the last 8 years. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathing heavily, their chests rising and falling in unison. "Martha," he said, his voice strained, "I should go, before this gets complicated." "It's already complicated," she whispered, her fingers tracing the faint outline of a scar on his chest through his shirt. "Stay." That one word sealed her fate. She led him not to her husband's old room, but to hers. In the soft glow of the oil lamp, Jesse's hands were surprisingly gentle as he unlaced the back of her dress, letting it pool around her feet on the floor. For the first time in years, Martha didn't feel old or matronly. She felt beautiful, desired, alive. He worshipped her body with his mouth in his hands, his touch both tender and fierce. He erased 8 years of cold, lonely nights with each caress, each whispered word. When he finally moved over her, pressing her down into the soft feather mattress, Martha felt a sense of rightness, of coming home to a place she never knew she'd been missing. "Look at me," he commanded in a harsh whisper as they moved together, their bodies finding a desperate, perfect rhythm. "I want to see your face." Martha opened her eyes and drowned in the intense, stormy blue of his. This wasn't just physical. This was something more. A connection so raw, so honest, it terrified her. Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the sheets, his fingers idly tracing patterns on her bare shoulder, she felt a sudden chill that had nothing to do with the cold outside. "What happens now, Jesse?" she whispered into the darkness. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice heavy. "But I'm not sorry. Neither was she. Not yet. But their stolen, snowbound paradise couldn't last forever. The world was waiting just outside the door, and it was coming for them." One morning while Jesse was sleeping, Martha found herself tidying his few belongings. An urge she couldn't explain compelled her to pick up his worn coat. The fabric was rough under her fingers. She told herself she was just checking the seams, but she knew she was lying. Her fingers found a small, hard lump sewn into the lining. With trembling hands, she fetched her sewing scissors and carefully snipped the threads. Inside was not a gold coin or a spare key. It was a folded piece of paper, a train ticket, a one-way ticket to San Francisco, California. It was dated for the day after the Abilene bank robbery, and it wasn't for one person. It was for two, Mr. and Mrs. J. Smith. She stood there in the silent cabin, the ticket in her hand, the world tilting on its axis. His story about being a simple farmer, about wanting to take his wife Sarah and his son Luke to California, it had been a lie. He wasn't running to his family. He was running with someone else. Who was Mrs. J. Smith? Her mind raced. The robbery, the deaths, the locket. A cold, sickening realization began to dawn. She walked back into the bedroom and looked at the man sleeping in her bed. He looked peaceful, almost boyish in his sleep. Not like a man who would lie so completely. She needed proof. Her gaze fell on his saddlebags, slung over a chair in the corner. Quietly, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs, she began to search them. Under a spare shirt and a box of ammunition, she found a small, leather-bound journal. Her hands shook as she opened it. The handwriting was a rough scrawl. Most of it was just notes about towns, poker winnings, the price of horses. But then she found it. An entry dated just a week before the robbery. "Eleanor says the time is right. The old man is getting suspicious. He trusts me, the fool. Thinks I'm helping him with his investments. If he knew I was helping myself to his wife, he'd kill me. We have to move soon. The bank is the only way. Enough to get us to the coast and start over. Just me and her. She's the only thing that matters." Eleanor, not Sarah. Martha felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the locket, still sitting on her nightstand. The woman with the soft eyes, the baby. It was all a prop. a carefully constructed lie to win her sympathy. He wasn't a grieving father. He was an adulterer, a thief, a killer who had murdered his lover's husband. Just as she was absorbing this monumental betrayal, she heard a sound outside. A horse. Peeking through the curtains, she saw her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, riding up the path to her cabin. Mrs. Patterson, whose own brother had been the bank clerk killed in the Abilene robbery. Martha's blood ran cold. The noose wasn't just tightening, it was already around her neck. "Morning, Martha," Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice sharp as the winter air. Her eyes, small and hard like pebbles, swept over the cabin with unnerving scrutiny. "Thought I heard voices coming from your place the last few weeks?" Martha forced a smile, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Just talking to myself, I suppose. Gets lonely out here since Edmund passed." "Hmm." Mrs. Patterson's gaze lingered on the woodpile. "That's a lot of firewood you've got split. My late husband was half your size and he struggled to get through that much in a month." Inside, Martha knew Jesse was awake. She could feel his presence, could imagine him listening, his hand probably resting on the grip of his pistol. One wrong word, one slip, and this quiet morning would explode into violence. "I hired a boy from town," Martha lied, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Cash work, a strong lad. But Mrs. Patterson was not a woman easily fooled. Her eyes narrowed as she spotted something on the laundry line that Martha had forgotten. A man's shirt, one of Edmund's old ones, hanging out to air. A shirt that was far too large for any boy. "Interesting," the older woman said, her voice dripping with insinuation. "Very interesting indeed." But the most chilling part came as she was turning her horse to leave. She paused and looked back at Martha, her expression a mixture of pity and contempt. "You know my brother, God rest his soul. He wrote to me the week before he was killed. He was worried about his wife, Eleanor. Said she'd been spending time with a charming stranger, a tall man with dark hair and blue eyes. He was worried the man was a swindler. My brother was always too trusting." Mrs. Patterson spurred her horse, leaving Martha standing frozen on her porch, the woman's words hanging in the air like a death sentence. She knew. Somehow, she knew. As Mrs. Patterson rode away, Martha stumbled back inside, her mind a whirlwind of terror and fury. The man in her bed wasn't just a liar. He was the man who had destroyed her neighbor's family. He had used her, played on her loneliness, her sympathy, her desire. She stormed into the bedroom. Jesse was sitting up in bed, fully alert, his gun now in his hand. "What did she want?" he asked, his voice low and tense. Martha didn't answer. She simply threw the train ticket and the open journal onto the bed in front of him. "Who is Eleanor?" she demanded, her voice shaking with a rage she hadn't felt in years. Jesse's face went pale. The charming, repentant man disappeared, replaced by the cold-eyed killer from the wanted posters. He looked from the journal to her face, and he knew the game was up. Before he could speak, before she could scream, the front door of the cabin exploded inward. A man stood framed in the splintered wood, his face shadowed by the brim of a dusty hat, a massive Colt. .45 held steady in his hand, aimed directly at Jesse's naked chest. "Well, well," the man drawled, a tobacco-stained grin spreading across his face. "Cole Mitchell, bounty hunter, the infamous Jesse Crow. Looks like your luck just ran out, and it seems you've been keeping yourself warm with the good widow Caldwell." Jesse moved like a snake, rolling off the bed, shielding Martha with his body as he reached for his own gun belt on the chair. But Mitchell was faster. A single booming shot echoed in the small room, splintering the floorboards just inches from Jesse's hand. Lover boy. Keep those hands where I can see 'em." Martha pulled the sheet up to her chin, her face burning with a toxic mixture of shame and terror. This was it, the moment she had dreaded. Her reputation, her quiet life, everything she had built since Edmund's death, all of it was being destroyed in an instant. "The woman's got nothing to do with this," Jesse snarled, his voice a deadly calm. Mitchell let out a harsh, grating laugh. "Nothing to do with it? She's been harboring a wanted fugitive for nearly a month. That's aiding and abetting, Crow. Your little friend here is looking at 5 years in a federal prison. Maybe more. 5 years. The words hit Martha like a physical blow. She would be over 60 when she got out, if she even survived. Please, she whispered, finding her voice. I'll pay you. Whatever the bounty is, I'll double it. I have money saved. Mitchell pretended to consider it. Tempting, ma'am. Real tempting. But I got a reputation to uphold. Can't have folks thinking Cole Mitchell can be bought off by an outlaws. He let the word hang in the air. A final, cruel insult. But then his eyes lit up with a different kind of greed. Actually, there might be another way. Eleanor sent me. Jesse's head snapped up. Eleanor? Yeah, your sweetheart. Seems she got tired of waiting for you. She wants her share of the bank money. She told me where I could probably find you. She also told me you two had a second stash. Money from a train job a year back. She said you buried it somewhere before you rode into Abilene. Jesse's face was a mask of disbelief and fury. That lying... Now, Mitchell continued, his grin widening, the official bounty on you is 2,000. But that robbery money is closer to 20. You tell me where that second stash is, and I might just forget I ever found you here. I'll tell the sheriff I caught you in the woods. The widow's name never has to come up. It was an impossible choice. Jesse's jaw worked as he looked from Mitchell's greedy face to Martha's terrified one. He was trapped, betrayed by one woman, cornered with another. All right, Jesse said finally, his voice heavy with defeat. You win. It's buried 3 miles north of here, under a lightning-scarred oak tree, just off the creek. Mitchell's eyes gleamed. Smart man. Now get dressed. And you, Mrs. Caldwell, you just stay put. You and I never even met. As Jesse pulled on his clothes, his eyes met Martha's. There was no apology there, no regret, only the cold, hard look of a survivor. The man she had fallen for, the man she had risked everything for, had never existed. He was a ghost, a story Jesse had invented to stay alive. Just as Mitchell was about to lead him out the door, shackled and defeated, Martha spoke, her voice clear and cold as ice. He's lying. Mitchell and Jesse both froze, turning to look at her. What did you say? Mitchell asked. There is no second stash, Martha said, standing up, wrapping the sheet around her like a royal robe. Eleanor made that up. She was always a desperate, greedy fool. Jesse stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. How could you know that? Because I knew Eleanor. I knew her husband, the poor clerk you murdered. I knew them both back in Abilene, years ago, before I was a widow, before you were anything but a common thief. The saloon I danced in, it was right across the street from their house. I saw you, Jesse. I saw you sniffing around her for months before the robbery. The room was dead silent, save for the crackling of the fire. But, Martha continued, a strange, triumphant light in her eyes, while there may not be a second stash, I know where the first one is, the money from the Abilene Bank. She held up a small, folded piece of oilcloth. While you were sleeping so peacefully in my bed, I found this sewn into the lining of your saddlebags. A map. She had him. She had them all. Mitchell's greed, Jesse's lies, Eleanor's betrayal. She held the key to all of it. She looked directly at the bounty hunter. Let me talk to him. Alone. 5 minutes. And I'll give you a prize worth 10 times your bounty. Mitchell, his mind reeling with the thought of all that money, hesitated for only a second. He nodded curtly, then dragged a chair over, shoving Jesse into it. He checked the shackles on Jesse's wrists one last time. 5 minutes, he growled. And don't try anything. I'll be right outside the door. He stepped out, pulling the shattered door closed behind him. Martha was alone with the man who had broken her life into 1,000 pieces. The silence was deafening. Jesse stared at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. He thought she was going to help him. He thought she was still the lonely, foolish widow. Martha, he began, his voice dropping to that soft, conspiratorial tone he had used so effectively on her. We can get out of this. You and me. That money's enough for both of us. We can go to California just like I... She cut him off with a laugh. A sound so cold and brittle it didn't sound like her at all. California? With you? You think I'm that stupid? Jesse's face fell. He realized his mistake. The woman standing before him was not the one he had seduced. This was someone else entirely. "My husband, Edmund," she said, her voice low and steady. "He wasn't just a rancher. That was the story we told when we moved here. To get away from the life. Before that, he was a Pinkerton detective for 15 years. He spent his life hunting men exactly like you. Vain, predictable, greedy men who think they can charm their way out of any situation." She took a step closer, her eyes boring into his. "I didn't just learn how to darn socks and bake bread from Edmund, Jesse. I learned how to watch, how to listen, how to spot a lie before it's even fully formed. I knew you were lying from the first night. The locket, the story about your family. It was all a little too perfect, a little too tragic. But my heart," she confessed, a flicker of genuine pain crossing her face. "My heart was lonely, and it wanted to believe you. That was my weakness, and you played it like a fiddle." She walked over to the chair where his gun belt lay. She picked up his pistol, the one Mitchell had kicked across the room. It felt heavy and cold in her hands. Jesse tensed in his chair, his eyes wide with fear. "Martha, don't." "Don't what?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. "Don't do what you would have done? You killed Eleanor's husband in cold blood. You would have killed me too, eventually, once the money ran out, or you got tired of me." She raised the pistol, aiming it directly at his heart. Jesse squeezed his eyes shut, and then she opened the cylinder, letting all 6 bullets drop to the floor. They landed with a series of soft, metallic clicks. "Final." "I'm not a murderer, Jesse," she said, placing the empty gun on the table. "But I am a survivor, and you are done telling lies." She walked to the door and pulled it open. Cole Mitchell was standing right there, his own gun drawn, listening to every word. "The map is real," Martha told him, her voice ringing with authority. "The money from the bank is buried under the floorboards of the root cellar, right where he was hiding when the posse rode by." Mitchell's eyes nearly bulged out of his head. He looked from Martha to Jesse, who sat slumped in his chair, utterly defeated. "Take him," Martha said. "Get him out of my house." The trial in Abilene was a spectacle. The entire county turned out to see the infamous Jesse Crow finally face justice. But the real star of the show was the surprise witness for the prosecution, Eleanor, the bank clerk's widow. Dressed in black, weeping delicately into a lace handkerchief, she painted a masterful picture of a terrified wife, coerced by the charming but violent Jesse Crow into helping him. She claimed he had threatened her baby, forced her to be his accomplice. She denied ever being his lover, portraying herself as another one of his victims. From the back of the courtroom, Martha watched this performance with a cold, simmering rage. She was disgusted by both of them. Liars, thieves, murderers, wrapping themselves in cloaks of victimhood. Then the prosecutor called his final witness, Mrs. Martha Caldwell. A murmur went through the crowd as she walked to the witness stand. Everyone knew the official story. The kind, respectable widow from Dodge City who had been deceived by the fugitive, offering him shelter out of Christian charity, unaware of his true identity. They expected a quiet, tearful testimony confirming the official report. They were wrong. When the prosecutor asked her to recount the events, Martha looked not at him, but at the 12 men on the jury. She took a deep breath and she told the truth. All of it. She told them about the locket, the lies about a wife and child. She told them about the journal, the affair with Eleanor, their plan to run away together on the bank's money. She told them how Jesse had confessed, in a moment of arrogant pride, that the clerk's death wasn't an accident. He had discovered the affair, and Jesse had shot him down in cold blood before he could expose them. The courtroom was in an uproar. Eleanor screamed that she was lying. Jesse sat in a stunned silence. Martha's own reputation was being immolated on the pyre of her testimony, and she did not flinch. "I harbored a fugitive," she said, her voice clear and strong, ringing through the silent courtroom. "I was a fool, blinded by loneliness. I broke the law, but I will not stand by and watch these 2 murderers walk away from what they've done." Her testimony sealed their fates. Presented with the journal and the map, which Martha had turned over to the sheriff, the jury saw the truth. Jesse Crow was sentenced not to prison, but to hang. And based on Martha's damning account, Eleanor was arrested right there in the courtroom, charged with conspiracy to commit robbery and murder. Martha Caldwell walked out of the courthouse a free woman, but her life in Dodge City was over. The whispers followed her everywhere. She was no longer the respectable widow. She was the outlaw's woman, a scandal, a disgrace. She had sacrificed her good name for the truth. She sold her cabin and the small plot of land that came with it. She packed a single suitcase, boarded an eastbound train, and disappeared. The story of the widow who brought down the Crow Gang became a local legend, a cautionary tale whispered by firesides for years to come. 20 years later, a woman stepped off the ferry in San Francisco. She was in her late 70s, but she stood straight and tall, her silver hair coiled neatly at the back of her neck. Her eyes, a startling blue, were clear and sharp. She was well-dressed, confident, and moved with the purpose of a woman who knew her own mind. This was Martha Caldwell. She hadn't run away to die in shame. She had used her share of the reward money, from the bounty on Jesse and from the recovery of the stolen bank funds, to start over. She had built a new life from the ashes of the old one. She wasn't a widow, a dancer, or an outlaw's lover. She was a successful businesswoman, the owner of a small but prosperous hotel that catered to independent women traveling alone, a safe harbor. She had turned it into a shelter, a place for women escaping men like Jesse, women who had been lied to, manipulated, and betrayed. She used the lessons she had learned in the hardest way possible to help them find their own strength, their own truth. Standing on the bustling pier, looking out at the vast, endless expanse of the Pacific Ocean, Martha felt a sense of peace she had never known in her quiet cabin or in Jesse's treacherous arms. She had lost her reputation, her home, and the love she thought she'd found. But in exchange, she had found something far more valuable. She had found herself. She was not a respectable widow. She was not a fallen woman. She was a survivor, and she was finally, completely free. If this story made you think, don't forget to hit that like button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Do you believe it's better to protect your reputation or to fight for the truth, no matter the cost? And be sure to subscribe for more stories from the strange and twisted corners of history.